It's been a few days since Netflix unleashed Castlevania, the 4-episode animated series that lovingly retells the story of Dracula's curse. I had a good time with it, and based on the reactions I've seen online, it seems like most people agree. It's an imperfect adaptation that has just the right level of gore and intrigue, and I'll definitely be watching more. The success of Castlevania has got a lot of people wondering if Netflix will continue to replay old video games for new show ideas. Could we possibly see Metroid, Ninja Gaiden, or even Splatterhouse get the series treatment? Who knows? But what I can tell you is that I have a list of games that should definitely not be adapted to television. I think you'll see what I mean. We're kicking off the list with an obvious statement. We definitely don't need a show based on columns. I know this should probably go without saying, but with the prospect of a Tetris trilogy looming on the horizon, I think this is as good a time as any to beg Netflix not to follow suit. Look, maybe Threshold Entertainment has figured out a way to turn a game based on falling blocks into a compelling story. I don't know, stranger things have happened. But Columns is a Sega game best left in the past. It has all the color matching of Puyo Puyo without any of the personality. There aren't even characters unless you count that middle-aged balding dude on the cover of Columns 3. I think it's safe to say that the world would be a better place without a bunch of movies and TV shows based on Tetris clones. That said, I'm not opposed to the adaptation of puzzle games. If Netflix is gonna look at this genre, then perhaps they should consider something like Adventures of Lolo or Solomon's Key. These are games with strong lead characters and an exciting world to explore. I think you could also make a strong case for something like Solstice or Mendel Palace. There's certainly puzzle games that could probably be turned into compelling drama, just not Columns. With their larger-than-life characters and penchant for fisticuffs, it's easy to see why so many fighting games have been adapted to film. The list includes Street Fighter, Tekken, Mortal Kombat, Dead or Alive, The King of Fighters, and a whole bunch more if you factor in anime. I don't know if Netflix is going to follow suit, but if they decide to adapt a fighting game, I have one small request. Don't give us Balls. Perhaps I need to elaborate. Balls 3D was an accolade fighting game released on both the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. It was sold as something of an alternative to the burgeoning trend of 3D fighting games like Virtua Fighter and Tekken, and positioned on systems that were more comfortable with 2D sprites than 3D polygons. The result was an ugly monstrosity where characters were made up of floating balls and none of them had even an ounce of personality. This is not a good game. It was panned by critics at the time and largely ignored all these years later. But there's one reason I'm including Balls 3D on this list over even worse fighting games like Rise of the Robots or Time Killers, and that's because those games actually bothered to build an interesting world. Balls 3D takes place in an empty arena with a giant billboard that says things like, "Beware of airborne balls," "Bullseye," "Balls from above," and "Open wide for Chunky." Just no. If Netflix wants to adapt a fighting game, then I recommend Eternal Champions. Although Sega only made 2 installments, it had an interesting cast of characters who were all plucked out of their time periods at the moment they were about to die. Just think about it. You have a pirate, politician, witch, caveman, cyborg, and even a chicken fighting for the exact same thing. If that's not a recipe for a great Netflix series, then I don't know what is. I love Cool Spot. It's from an era when it often felt like David Perry could do no wrong. Of course, that was before Messiah and 2 Matrix games. But his 16-bit output was the stuff of legend. In fact, his version of Aladdin was so good that it convinced me to take a chance on a little game starring a certain 7-Up mascot. And I'm glad I did, because Cool Spot is an incredibly fast, fun, and stylish 2D platformer that shines on both the Super NES and Genesis. But for as much as I love Cool Spot, I definitely don't want to see it turned into a Netflix series. And that goes for pretty much every game based on fast food, snacks, or soda advertisements. We already see too many commercials as it is, so the last thing we need is a whole show dedicated to selling junk food. Netflix can skip right past MC Kids, Yo-Noid, Kool-Aid Man, Doritos Crash Course, Chester Cheetah Too Cool to Fool, Coca-Cola Kid, McDonald's Treasureland Adventure, those creepy Burger King games, and even David Perry's other advert game, Mick and Mac Global Gladiators. Instead of filling up the online airwaves with more blatant advertising, I'd rather see Netflix go in the complete opposite direction and mock materialism with a show based on Smash TV. That's right, Smash TV. Obviously, you can't make it a real game show, but I'd love to see a show that explores why somebody would put themselves through this style of Running Man competition. I'm telling you, there's a lot of potential in a Smash TV series. Not the Smash TV series, I mean the Smash TV series, you know what I mean. I like Virtua Fighter. I dig the characters, and wouldn't be disappointed if Netflix decided to turn it into a TV series. But what I don't want is an adaptation of Virtua Fighter Kids, the 1996 spin-off that shrunk Sarah, Jackie, Akira, and Wolf down into pint-sized fighters with large super-deformed heads. The last thing we need is the Muppet Babies of video game shows. And it's not just Virtua Fighter that's done this, but also Valis, Final Fantasy, Street Fighter, Guilty Gear, Battle Arena Toshinden, Final Fight, and even Snatcher. That's the wrong direction these shows should be going. Instead of making everything cuter and younger looking, I want to see Netflix take these games and explore their mature themes. There are already far too many TV shows based on games aimed at little kids, so catering to the old school fans that are now in their 30s and 40s seems smart. Instead of going young, I recommend Netflix go with something adult and meaty. I specifically want them to turn Phantasy Star into a long-running series. Think of it like Game of Thrones, only with futuristic tech, massive aliens, and pink hair. There's no way that could fail. From Kratos to pretty much everybody in Dead or Alive, we're used to seeing a lot of video game characters where next to nothing as they go about their business. But what if that's still too covered up for your liking? Then let me introduce you to the final game on our list, Custer's Revenge. This was an Atari 2600 game released in the early 1980s by Mystique and described as Swedish erotica. I'm not sure that's how I would describe it, but let's continue. In reality, this is a game about a very, excited General Custer and his attempt to rape a naked Native American woman tied to a pole. Yeah. The game was eventually pulled from circulation and has since become an infamous reminder of how bad things got before the great game crash of '83. I'm sure I don't need to tell Netflix this, but Custer's Revenge should be an immediate hard pass. I think the same applies to all the misguided attempts at Atari 2600 erotica, especially Beat 'em and Eat 'em. This is a game that brings up a lot of questions about what dating was like in the early 1980s, and I'm not sure I want any of them answered. If Netflix really wanted to go with a controversial game that was accused of having racy content, then I recommend Night Trap instead. Sure, the acting in the original wasn't very good, and the game isn't that much fun to play. But the premise is solid, and the hysteria over the sex and gore was completely overblown. This was a perfectly tame B-rate horror film that could actually stand to use more blood, guts, and sexuality thrown in. But keep the song, because it's golden. Hey, thanks for watching me talk about the games I don't want Netflix to adapt. So, here's the question of the day. What games did I leave out? I want to know what games you definitely don't want to see turned into a TV show. And let me know why, because I'm curious. Anyway, we're all set up for a busy week full of reviews and previews. We're also going to be taking a look at Electronic Gaming Monthly's best reviewed games of 1991 on Wednesday, which is guaranteed to be the most controversial episode yet. Now, hear me out. I recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.